So this is kind of with a grain of salt. Small by definition, you can go in a lot of different directions with that. So what I wanted to do with this tour was show you some things that'll do well in small spaces, that can take some shade, and that are tough plants for the landscape. So did my best not to make this a Japanese maple love fest, because we are aplenty with Japanese maples. I may have snuck some in, mostly to help also talk about what I look at when I'm looking at shade gardens and what things I want to have in shade gardens. So a little tiny dab into designing with plants, but things that I look for when I'm looking for plants that I like for shade gardens. Does that sound good to everybody? Yeah. All right. We're going to have a very circuitous route through the Arboretum. I kind of wandered and waxed and waned this morning, putting the finishing touches on it. So we're going to mostly be in the shade for obvious reasons. So without further ado, the first one is right around the corner. So to me, this is kind of a quintessential shade garden. You've got different layers of things. You're taking advantage of all that space in between the big tree canopies. You've got herbaceous things. You've got bulbs in the spring. You've got small shrubs, both evergreen and deciduous. And then you've got a layer of small trees kind of scattered under here too. So to me, if you're looking for shade garden ideas, all you have to do is take 10 steps in our entrance, and you've got this great cornucopia of things kind of to pick from. Within this realm, there's two things I wanted to point out. And I said I wasn't going to make it a Japanese love fest, but the very first tree is, of course, the Japanese maple. If you don't know the story, I've told it many times, I'll tell it again. When JC was planting and planning, one of his favorite plants were Japanese maples, because they are really good landscape plants. There's hundreds, over 200 cultivars of Acer japonicum, probably the same amount of Acer palmatum. So there's a lot of flavors to pick from. So when you're standing in the garden, pretty much anywhere you stand, you should be able to look and see a Japanese maple in one of the horizons around you. So that kind of goes all the way through the entire Arboretum. So our first one is this one here. It's Acer japonicum Aconitifolium. And when I learned plant names, I do a little sing-songy thing in my head. I'm not going to sing the song here. I worked at a garden in Philadelphia, and we planted two huge 2.5-inch caliper balled and burlap plants of these. It took forever to plant them, and we made up this song to kind of get us through the dirge of digging in this horrible soil. And every time I see this plant, I'm reminded of that stupid story. But Acer japonicum Aconitifolium is called the full moon Japanese maple, and it's called that because the leaf is almost entire. You think of Japanese maples having lots of venation, and this definitely has those deep venations, but it's almost completely full. In a little bit more light, this leaf can get bigger. But the thing I love about this plant, it'll top out at about this height here. Very nice smooth bark in the wintertime, so it has good winter textured interest. Good consistent green color, bigger leaves and a little bit more light. But the fall color on this does not disappoint. Reds and oranges, a little bit of splashes of yellow, but I really love the texture of this with those big leaves, and that's why it's the first one. A great performer for the shade. The other one, it's right over here by this fire stanchion. Not gonna make this a Japanese maple love fest, but we do have a lot of really good maples, a good collection of them here at the Raulston. And this is Acer campestre Nanum. This is the dwarf or compact hedge maple. And you see this plant used a lot in European gardens for, does anybody want to guess what they use it for? Hedges, thank you. It's a good plant to use. It stays compact. It takes pruning. It forms a really nice dense hedge. This is a dwarf version of that. I'm not quite sure how tall it will top out at. This one's been here for a while, so I can't imagine it'll get much bigger than this. But again, nice texture with the leaves and has really, really pretty fall color. Acer campestre is a good urban tree. It can take a variety of soils. And that's another reason that I like this, because it's a really good performer. It's one that I think should be used more often. Acer rubrum, our red maple, gets used a lot in landscapes, and it can get big and rangy. This one stays compact, as does the true species. So 2 maples to kind of start off with out the door. There's going to be a few more scattered in because they're great performers in the shade. But one of my favorite species is Acer campestre. Any questions? Yes?
Is it advisable to plant it that close to a building?
Yes.
Really?
No. We tend to pack things in super close, and you know, Japanese maples aren't going to have an invasive root system. They're not going to push into the foundation. You know, smaller plants you can do that with, but you know, you have to be very mindful of what type of soil you have. Here, traffic is a concern, but yeah, we do as we say, not as we do in this particular situation.
This one, does that get good fall color, did you say?
It gets good fall color, more yellows and oranges. Let's move around the corner. This is the next one on our list. This is a linden. This is Tilia compacta Halka, the summer sprite little leaf linden. Lindens are one of my favorite genus, so I had to include them today. This is a plant that does better in a lot of sun, but it can take a little bit of shade. It's also a really good urban tree. You see this used a lot more in the mid-Atlantic, the Northeast. I'm seeing it used a lot more in the South. I'm seeing it used as a street tree in Atlanta and other places. It's a really, really good urban tree. Medium to fast growing, doesn't have a lot of cultural issues. The only negative thing I can say about lindens is every once in a blue moon, Japanese beetles will descend upon it and devour it, but it's kind of a cyclical thing. It doesn't happen all the time, but I love the leaf shape. I love the texture. They are prolific bloomers, not a showy flower, but this is something that when it's in flower, it absolutely vibrates with bees and other pollinators. There's one over coming up from the McSwain building up the stairs that when that has bees in it, you can almost feel them vibrating in the ground, just covered with pollinators. So a good tree for that. This one I like because it's a dwarf. This is about as big as this will get. I also know the nurseryman that developed this tree, Chet Halka, Halka's Nursery in New Jersey. Really good nurseryman, creates a lot of really good plants. So I was tickled to see that we had this one in the garden. But there isn't a linden that is out there that I do not like and recommend. A nice one for smaller, kind of tight garden spaces. Better in full sun, but can take a little bit of shade of kind of upper overstory kinds of things. Any questions?
I thought these Tilias didn't like the humidity and heat we have down here. Is this one special?
They do fine.
They're all okay.
Yep. You see them a lot, the Midwest, the Mid-Atlantic, up into the Northeast, and they're slowly starting to filter down. The city of Charlotte started to plant them as an urban tree. Trees, in Atlanta, it's one of the trees that they promote as a good urban street tree. There's a lot of different flavors. There's upright ones, there's wider ones, but it's a good tree because it's well behaved under power lines. Some of the smaller ones, it doesn't grow up into the power lines.
Fall color?
It depends, kind of a yellowish some years not so much. You know, with our drier, hotter summers, they seem to kind of get crispy and just fall off. But it used to be a pretty consistent kind of a yellow fall color. And like every other fall, it seems like it's pretty and kind of nondescript the rest of the year. Because of the small branches, and the small buds, it has a really nice texture in the wintertime, I think, personally. Anybody else? This way. Continuing with my maple love fest, this is another species that I like a lot. Acer burgeranum Mino yatsubusa. This is a kind of a dwarf contorted trident maple. And trident maple is another species of maple that I think should and could be used to substitute red maples in urban landscapes. They actually plant a lot of these in Raleigh. The straight species, I see them used quite a bit. Really tough, adaptable to urban soils and different urban situations. Traditionally, they all have really kind of nice exfoliating bark, and you can see it here. Good kind of leaf texture. and pretty consistent fall color, reds and oranges with splashes of yellow. That's a consistent thing. And with that bark, you get really nice winter interest. So this is one, this particular species I think should, and in some cases is used a lot more in urban landscapes. This one has kind of a contorted branch structure, and the leaves are a little bit unusual compared to the straight species. More pinnate and with deeper lobes on them. The way I learned this is it looks like turkey feet, but I like that texture that it provides as well. This is also a tree that does equally well in full sun, and it can take, this is pretty dense shade and it's fairly happy here. I think with the organic matter and in company with light coming through, it's found a nice niche here. But I really, really like this tree again for all those different seasons of interest. Any questions before we move on? We're quiet today. Okay, we're gonna go to the weeping walk. I'm going to sneeze. It's gonna be loud. Right from my toes. Next one on the tour, we're just at the start of our weeping walk. This is Styrax japonicus, and I think this is an unnamed one that's kind of weeping, and it was planted in the theme of JC and evaluating things to kind of see what it does. This is a genus of plant that I think every tour that I've done, except for conifers, I've talked about a Styrax in some form or fashion. It's another kind of underutilized genus. It's something that Mark and I both have a strong affinity for. There isn't a Styrax out there that I don't like, and this is a really, really good one. We'll look at one later on that's a true weeper. But what I like about this is the nice smooth bark, which gives it really good winter interest, pretty consistent green foliage. And if you feel it, it's kind of thick, so it lends itself to be kind of drought tolerant. This guy flowered earlier in the year, and you can see the seed pods kind of persist on it, giving it some interest. Fall color is kind of nondescript, yellows on occasion, and not super consistent. I wouldn't say this is a good fall color plant, but this nice, beautiful weeping texture is why it's here and why I like it. But I wanted to talk about this genus in terms of using it in landscapes. Again, it can take full sun, but it also does good in the shade, and you're going to get better flower set with more light, obviously. But if you wanted to use this from a design perspective, you could find a niche for this in an understory like I talked about earlier. There's different sizes, different colors, different leaves, different flower shapes. There's native ones. This is one obviously from Japan, but I really, really like this genus, and it's a good plant to put into your Rolodex of things to pick from. I mentioned the big linden coming up from the visitor or from the McSwain building. That's the guy right behind us, and you can see the old flowers that are on it, and just imagine all the bees and pollinators that flocked to that when that thing was going full guns. Just a sight to behold. That also makes really, really good honey. Linden is a good honey to harvest. Any questions as we ease into the garden? Yes?
I see a lot of fruit on this one.
Yep.
Is it weedy? Do all those fruits?
I've not ever noticed that it, I don't think it is persistent. I've not seen lots of seedlings coming up.
Are they edible? Good for birds?
You can eat anything, but I wouldn't recommend eating these. And I've not ever seen birds eat them before. They're good to throw at people. But to me, it adds some interest to the tree. There are some that have, the ones that flower really heavy. There's one called Fragrant Fountain that we'll look at near the end of the tour that is covered from head to toe with flowers, and then you get all those seed pods that persist after that. I don't think that's edible, but it wouldn't surprise me if it is. Okay, onward and upward. If I didn't include this, somebody would get upset. So again, apologies for the Acer Love Fest, but this is a tree that could almost have its own Facebook or Instagram account. This is Acer palmatum bihu. This is the gold bark Japanese maple. If you haven't seen this in the wintertime, you're missing out. This is absolutely electric, like it's plugged into something. Bright yellow bark through the wintertime adds a ton of interest. When it gets wet from the rain, that color kind of comes out, but it kind of turns more green during the growing season. Typical Japanese maple leaf shape, nice consistent green color through the summer months, and incredible traditional Japanese maple fall color in the fall, reds and oranges, with a little bit of yellow thrown in for good measure and braggadocious rights. Really, really pretty. A great performer in the landscape. More kind of vase shaped, so it doesn't take up a lot of space, and it can take a little bit of sun, but it likes kind of the situation it's in here, where it gets kind of filtered light throughout the day. This is a perennial favorite here for visitors. Any questions before we move on?
I always pronounced it Bayou. That ain't.
It's
How did you pronounce it?
Biho. Help me out.
Sure, Biho.
Biho.
Is it Japanese?
Yeah.
Yeah, Biho.
Biho. Yeah. Good question. I mean, with Latin names, Latin is a dead language, but there's such a huge influx of plants that we've gotten from Japan. And a lot of time the spelling gets lost when it comes over here, and the pronunciation is absolutely butchered. I've been lucky to travel to Japan a couple times, and I try my best to honor that and pronounce them the way that they are, but you can't say it the wrong way. All right, let's move on. I would be remiss if I didn't talk about redbuds. That's another genus of plant that we have aplenty here at the Arboretum, and a lot of breeding work has been done on them here at NC State. And there's a lot of really, really good ones in the nursery trade. Again, all different sizes, all different flavors. This is a favorite of mine. I like the burgundy leaf ones. There used to only be one forest pansy, and there's been a lot of work recently on introducing new ones to the trade. This is amethyst, and I think this is one of ours. I'm not 100% sure, but again, redbuds are a plant that do well in full sun and partial shade. This one does well here. It's got kind of high canopy shade, so it still gets a lot of light. If this were out in the sun, it would be much, much darker than this. And there's one that we might walk by when we move on that's in more sunlight, and it's shades darker than this one. But this one is bred for this color and also for the small stature, so it lends itself well to be good for small gardens. The other evil part of my plan of coming over here was to take a look at the canopy behind us, just to take a second to talk about shade gardens. And it's a good vantage point to do that. So again, what we're looking at underneath the canopy of the two very old willow oaks are pretty typical shade that we deal with our landscapes. Maybe you've got a big tree in your yard that you're trying to work underneath and are struggling with what to plant. So this is a good indication of a mix of, you've got the bulk of our boxwood collection is here. So you've got evergreen things that do well in the shade, lots of small understory trees like the redbuds. There's a lot of dogwoods and magnolias in there, and also taking advantage of those layers of shrubs that work well in a shady situation. So again, just trying to drive home the point. If you're looking for things to jazz up a shady garden, there's no better place to come than here, and come to these spots where there are these dappled shades to kind of explore and see what's there, and really good opportunities just to explore some of these parts of the garden that don't get a lot of visitors. And this is one of my favorite spots to come because it's usually kind of quiet in here, despite being close to the roadway. But lots of things to kind of discover and get ideas from in here. Any questions? Yes, sir.
You know that flamethrower?
Yes.
I noticed it doesn't caliber up very well. Have you noticed that with some of them?
You shouldn't have to stake anything more than a year. And I think when you buy, in particular redbuds in particular, they push a lot of canopy growth, and they don't have, they want to keep the pot small in the nursery, so you don't have a lot of roots developed. So the key to success with that is when you're planting it, is to give it room to expand and develop its root system. You may have to do some pruning with the canopy to kind of even that out, because they're also prone to tearing because of the weight. I think that's a redbud thing in general. I think it's kind of just the way that they grow. If you look at this one in particular, I mean, you got branches growing in all directions, and a lot of stuff is coming off of that middle section. So there's a lot of weight right there, and they're prone to falling apart. Yeah, And some of that is there's been different species bred into these, and they're going to do some different things. I think flamethrower is canadensis, our native one, and it just takes it time. They're slow to get established for whatever reason, and then all of a sudden they just take off. We've got one at our back gate, back by the perennial trials, that has gotten so big it's growing through the fence. It's completely consumed this whole corner, and it's absolutely on fire right now. It's beautiful. I need to take pictures of it, but they are kind of slow to grow. Any other questions? All right, we're off to our next spot. Our next one is a genus of plants I have kind of a love-hate relationship with. This is Stewartia rostrata. This is the Chinese Stewartia. There are a whole bunch of native ones, and this is a plant that, for whatever reason, thrives on tough love. I built a huge garden in Charlotte and had a lot of shade and wanted an understory tree that had nice fall color, nice bark, and produced flowers, and that's Stewartia in a nutshell. They like tough love. They like to be planted in kind of less than hospitable conditions. When you see our native ones in the wild, that's where they're growing. And I had to consult with a plant colleague of mine, Jack Johnson, who's known for Stewartia from Georgia. And he came to my garden. He's like, ride me around and I'll show you where to plant them. Everywhere he told me to plant them, those are the ones that made it in the garden. So they thrive on a little tough love. We prescribe to that in buckets here at the Raulston, and I think we've had good success with our Stewartia. This one, the Chinese one, doesn't have as showy bark as some of our natives do. There's some other Japanese ones that have really nice one. Stewartia pseudocamellia is one, but rostrata has great big flowers, and you can see the buds here take on kind of that reddish color before they burst open. So this thing's getting ready to go full guns pretty soon. It's also called the beak Stewartia because the flowers look like little beaks coming out of like a bird's nest. But there's going to be a lot of flowers on this, and that's why I like it for shade. Stewartia tend to be kind of upright growing. There's been some work to develop some dwarf ones. This guy here will get about 10 to 12 feet tall, and that's kind of how big most of them get. Some of them, the Japanese ones, can get a little bit bigger, and they have really pretty bark. But I've killed a lot of these in my horticulture career, unfortunately, but I love the flowers. So nice spring flowers, good consistent leaf color through the growing season. They have really nice fall color, reds and deep burgundies with orange in there. And this one has smooth bark, which I think is nice in the wintertime, but a lot of them have kind of exfoliating bark, which is really pretty. But a good small-ish flowering tree for shade gardens. And this is going to be worth a visit as it gets ready to pop open in the next couple weeks. Yes?
What kills them? I mean, what do I need to avoid?
Overwatering is super bad. Planting too deep will kill them outright. I've done that quite a bit. Those are the two things. Loving them to death, giving them too much water. They don't really need to be fertilized. I know people that have fertilized them, and that pushes growth and not the flower development. But I think it's the water issue. Tough love with that. If you've got them and they're still rocking and rolling, you're doing something right. Yeah, I just realized I had not been repeating questions, and I'm neck deep into this. I knew I would forget. I'm sorry. We're talking about the cultural requirements of Stewartia and what are the things to look for and you know the things to avoid. We were just discussing how the soil can wash away from them. That's typically not a good thing for plants. 3 to 4 inches of mulch will help with that to a degree. And for Stewartia, I mean, we use leaf compost here, and that's the best mulch because for us it's free because it's leaves from campus. They break down and add a ton of organic matter to the soil. They're easy to move around. The only negative thing is they break down super quick. And for whatever reason, this entire edge all the way through the garden, I think the squirrels and rabbits come out at 6:30 and they kick all the leaves in the grass because they know we're going to come and blow and have to clean it up. So it's light and it can move around a little bit, but 3 to 4 inches of mulch. Don't overwater them. Plant them at the right depth. Look for a root flare. and I think you'll be okay. Any other questions? All right, I think we're going to zip through the white garden. So right at the edge of the white garden, where the theme of everything in here is what?
White foliage flowers.
You're not allowed to answer. White foliage and flowers, thank you. And the next one I want to talk about is a dogwood. Not the best specimen. I like this one because it's a weeping, but again, to kind of check that box of plants that do well in small plants that do well in shady gardens. This is Cornus cusa, and it's a weeping cultivar called Elizabeth Lustgarten. This Asian dogwood, I hate to say it, I like better than our native because it flowers a little bit later. It flowers after the leaves come out, so the flowers stand really bright against the dark foliage. Really, really nice fall color, burgundies and reds and oranges. I like the texture of that leaf. It looks a lot like our native, but I think the veins stick out a little bit more. And this one is a weeper, so it fits in really well in the understory of this big flowering apricot. The Cornus cusas in general have nice kind of exfoliating bark as they get bigger, so there's another dynamic aspect to it. So you get the winter interest, the summer, the late spring, early summer flowers, and nice consistent foliage. There's a ton of cultivars of these out there. There's upright ones, there's weepers like this, there's vase-shaped ones. There's been a lot of breeding work with this and some other dogwoods to get disease resistance and bigger flowers. So this is definitely a good one to have in shady landscapes, and they perform well kind of in this understory. Any questions? The question was about the leaf margins. Is there a different color? To me, when I see that, I'm thinking nutrient. Something's going on either nutrient-wise or there's a little bit of stress there. It's not supposed to be that light color. So I'm not quite sure what that is. To me, that looks like some kind of nutrient deficiency. So if I were a homeowner, I would do a soil check and see what's going on there. I noticed that this morning too as I was looking at it. Like, is the light shining through it, or is it, yeah, it's got some, and that might just be the big flush for this time of the year and it's just getting caught up. If that continues, we'll do a soil sample and see what's going on. That's a good question. All right, I think we're gonna head to the lath house. I mentioned another Styrax that we would look at, and we've come upon it. This is Styrax japonicus, and it's one called Fragrant Fountain. This is one of my favorites of the Japanese Styrax cultivars, very aptly named. It just kind of mounds over itself, and it's one of those plants that kind of has that kind of cousin it look, where it's just really weepy and floppy, and no two really look exactly the same. This, in full sun, this gets a little bit denser and will literally be covered from top to bottom with flowers. And you can see here, because it's in more shade, which it's perfectly adaptable to, you just don't get as many flowers. You can see a few seed pods tucked in there from when it flowered earlier in the year, but not that many. I had this planted out in full sun in my garden in Charlotte, and it was literally covered from top to bottom. White flowers, very fragrant, obviously with that name. Fall color is kind of indescript, yellows and dunny brown colors, but in a good year, pretty good clear yellow. But the beauty of this, outside of that cascade of covered carpeted flowers, is the winter interest. The bark takes on kind of a silver tone, and with these thin, delicate branches that hang down, it has just a really beautiful soft texture. I love this plant in the wintertime. But again, I'm partial. There isn't a Styrax out there that I do not like. This is one of my favorites. Any questions about this? The question was, is it available? This one's been around for not a long time, but it's in the nursery trade. I've seen it quite a bit. There's another one called Evening Light that is not as, it weeps, but not as strong as this, but it has burgundy leaves on it. And with the white flowers of Styrax, it's equally striking. Those are the two that I like to recommend to people. Upright, kind of cascades down, a good tree for small gardens. Anybody else? We're gonna duck in here. Okay, Another dogwood to talk about, we're now in our lath house, and this is another good spot to come for shade garden ideas. We typically kind of tuck things that need a little more protection in here and some of our more unusual plants to get the protection of the lath structure that you see above us. This is Cornus hongkongensis gecko. This is an evergreen Japanese dogwood. 8 to 10 feet is about as big as it will get. And this one looks a little taller because it's up in a raised bed. And it is obviously very happy here. It's busted through the top of the lattice structure and is probably, it's topped out pretty much at that point. But because it's evergreen and it flowers, you get the nice backdrop of that really pretty flower set against the dark foliage. So because it's evergreen, no fall color, but I love this plant because of that kind of creamy, light green colored flowers. This does good in deep shade, flowers better with filtered light like we have here. And this is one of those plants that kind of stalls and sits in the ground for a couple of years and then just kind of takes off. They're doing some work on these. There's a couple of different cultivars. There's some dwarf ones, and I've seen some upright ones in Japan. I'm not sure if those are available here yet, but I like to talk about the use of evergreens in shade also, because green is a color and it's something that can be used to great effect in shade gardens. But I love this one because it's flowering so heavy right now. Any questions before we move on? Alrighty, we're gonna go into the Japanese garden next. I think, but I'm not gonna swear to it, this is the last maple I'm gonna talk about. And I wasn't gonna do it, but I walked by it 3 times this morning and it's so bright and full of color, it's worth mentioning. This is Acer palmatum okuji nishiki. This is a variegated Japanese maple, obviously, and from a shade gardening standpoint, you can't beat something that adds light and brightness to a shade garden, and this definitely does that. There are a bazillion, literally, that's a horticultural term, variegated ones out there, both of japonicum and palmatum. There's one to fit any color, any size, any interest that you have, but it's worth mentioning variegated plants to use in shade gardens because of what this is doing here. If you look at the akuba behind the folks over there, again, same kind of concept. That foliage adds a lot to a shade garden where things kind of get lost in the shadows, and in seas of green, you can spot bright highlights of color, not just with flowers, but with leaves. And just wanted to use this to kind of highlight that. Any questions about that? Yes. The question was, does this tree ever show any kind of reversion? And there actually is some right here on this branch. And that's a problem with a lot of variegated plants. Some are worse than others, to where it wants to go back to the species and be all green. The easiest way to, the more you look, the more you're going to see. The easiest way to deal with that is just to prune it off. There are some trees that are horrible at doing this, and others that don't. But it's something to keep in mind. Thank you for bringing that up. It's something to keep in mind when you're planting things like this. You'll see things come up from, sometimes things are grafted, and you'll have things come up from the rootstock. But this is just this plant wanting to do what it does naturally, is go back to the straight species. Good question. Yes. The variegated ones get very good fall color. I think they do, and I think that variegation adds a completely different dimension, because a lot of times the light colors will either fade or fill in with other colors, or you'll just get fall color where the green tissue is, and it's kind of highlighted with that. So that's a whole nother layer of interest with the plant. The question was, are about 95% of all Japanese maples grafted? I don't know if that's an accurate percentage, but I would say a lot of them are. That's the fastest way to produce a plant. And Japanese maples, those that are good at it, that's a good way to produce a lot of them is to graft this part onto a green rootstock, and they develop pretty quickly. A lot of nursery, not a lot, a select few nurserymen will only grow things on their own roots to avoid reversions, both from the trunk and things like this. So this is probably a grafted tree. We just can't see that graft down below. But a lot of them are grafted, yes. All right, let's go into the Japanese garden. So last two for the morning. We are in the Japanese garden and wanted to talk a little bit about conifers, using conifers for shade. Again, there's lots of different cultivars and things that you can use. On my right is Cryptomeria japonica pom-pom. It's a dwarf cryptomeria, and a dwarf cryptomeria is a bit of an oxymoron. Straight species can reach over 100 feet tall, so if this thing only gets 50 feet tall, it's still a dwarf technically. But this one stays kind of small and diminutive. But Cryptomeria do well in full sun. They're also good for understory. There are also a bazillion cultivars of this particular tree, and one for every interest and size and shape and color that you would like. I like this one because it has these little pom-poms of growth that pop up. The last one I wanted to talk about is on my left here. This is Chamasippus obtusa, Hinoki falls cypress. These can get kind of big, but it's often used in Japanese gardens to kind of mimic bigger trees. But again, this does well in full sun, but they can also take a fair amount of shade. And I think in the shade, they don't grow quite as big. There are also a bazillion cultivars of Chamasippus obtusa, variegated ones, yellow ones, dwarf ones, low growing ones. These I like because they look like what they would look like in the forest where they grow naturally. But just wanted to broaden that palette of things that you can use from a shade garden perspective, and wanted to end here in one of my favorite spots of the Arboretum. So any questions before we head back? All right. Yep, let's head back.